have chosen to remain anonymous. Because of that, I'm going to refer to them as Ann and Paul. Ann and Paul, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
You're welcome.
And please give us a brief bio on yourself.
All right. I'm 22 years old. I've lived in North Carolina pretty much my entire life. Just recently moved to Wisconsin a couple months ago, and I don't really know what else to say.
That's fine. That's no problem. How about you, Paul?
Well, born and raised in Wisconsin. Pretty much lived most of my life out in the country. And like traveling around Wisconsin, avid hunter and fisherman.
And please tell us about the work you've done researching cryptids.
Well, it started off with Sasquatch research. I got suckered into watching Finding Bigfoot, and it piqued my curiosity. And also, my fiance got me into it. I started to see all of the encounters that people had had with Sasquatch, and then with my fiance being from Wisconsin, it kind of brought on the Beast of Bray Road and the Michigan Dog Man, and it kind of got me into that research. And I've been researching for probably about 2 or 3 years now.
It's funny how all this ties together once you start researching one type of cryptid. Paul, I know you're a long-time Sasquatch researcher. Please tell us about some of the research you've done.
Well, it started off being the typical reading the books and the Patterson film. After, I got comfortable with that, I started going out in the field more, concentrating my efforts in the Horicon Marsh area. If I'm not mistaken, actually is the largest marsh in the United States. The habitat's perfect.
How big is that place?
Exact square miles of the Horicon Marsh, right off the top of my head, I cannot tell you. But it encompasses a large chunk of Dodge County itself. And partial of Fond du Lac County, too, I believe.
If it's the largest marsh in the U.S., it must be a big area.
Lots of hunters have gone out there, whether it be deer hunting, mostly if you're out in the marsh, out there, you're usually a duck hunter. There's been quite a few that get turned around and get lost and can't find their way back.
Well, considering what we're going to talk about tonight, it sure makes you wonder if some of those instances weren't cases of people just simply getting lost. Maybe there was actual foul play, and possibly not at the hands of humans. But that's one of those who knows situations. And I know you've been interested in the Sasquatch phenomenon for some time now. Before you had your Dogman encounter, what was your opinion on their existence?
Well, I had no doubt that they existed. After I started looking at some of the encounters, I could tell that maybe a couple were either partial truth or maybe parts of it got exaggerated. But once I started reading more into it, I automatically knew that they existed.
It's kind of a sobering reality once you realize they do exist, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
We're going to get into this later, but of course you had that encounter with one, so what more evidence do you need to know that they really do exist in the first place? Paul, we've already established the fact you've been a Sasquatch researcher for a long time. Have you formed any opinions to explain why so many people in the Sasquatch community scoff at the idea of dogmen being a reality?
Well, once you're studying a Sasquatch, you get kind of driven on that one thing. And the whole dogman thing, I think a lot of researchers look at as kind of this whole Hollywood werewolf type thing. But going deeper into the research, you have a type 3 Sasquatch, which is, for better lack of words, the canine-headed Sasquatch, which I think there's that little bit of play over between the canine and then type 3.
And do you have any opinions on why people in the Sasquatch community are so reluctant in a lot of cases to accept the existence of dogman?
Well, I think once you start researching with Sasquatch, it's almost like you get tunnel vision in a way. I mean, you're finally told that something you've always been told will never exist actually does exist. When you start doing research, you're only worried about anything that's Sasquatch. So when you hear anything else, you're like, no, couldn't happen. I'm focused on this right now.
Yeah, that does make good sense. And after you had your encounter, were you reluctant to seek help, or did you feel you didn't need any?
I'd say it was probably a 50-50. When it originally happened, I believe that I went into some kind of shock. I was kind of reluctant in a way, just for the fact people would probably think I'm crazy, because it's not something that your every normal day hiker, or even just walking down the street, you're not going to really see them, or so people would think.
Without giving away any of the details of your encounter, do you think you treated your encounter differently than you would have if you had seen a Sasquatch instead of a dog man?
Honestly, I don't know if I would have. I mean, from what I saw, I may not have been as scared as a Sasquatch, but in the same way, I may have. So I probably would have just treated it the same way.
The one that you saw, and we're going to get into the details of your encounter later, but because of the way the one you saw reacted, it had to leave you a lot more calm than had it reacted in a much more violent manner. But like I said, we'll get into that later on. From the responses you got when you told people about seeing that dog man, do you think you were treated differently than you would have been had you told those people you had seen a Sasquatch?
Maybe not. A lot of the people that I told just kind of gave me the cold shoulder in a way. It was just, oh, you're just being over imaginative, and there's no way they would exist.
They kind of gave you the cold shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
That's a shame. Were you surprised by some of the responses you got? I'm sure that whole cold shoulder thing caught you by surprise.
I was kind of expecting at least my really close friends to be like, okay, maybe you saw this, maybe you didn't, but let's say maybe you did. It's gonna be okay. Instead of, you're just temporarily losing your mind, for lack of a better term.
In a situation like that, it's not hard to tell who really does have your back by the way they react when you reach out for help in a situation like that. All right, Ann, please tell us about your encounter. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
All right. Where I was going to college, we had pretty much a split week. Monday was a long day, Friday was a long day. So we used to always pick Wednesday, since we got out at noon, to pretty much go exploring around the area where the school was. We had just got done with class. There was a group of about 4 of us. We went and grabbed some lunch and decided that we were going to go hiking in a nearby, I don't really know if it's a state park, but it's like a county park maybe. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head. Changed into, our hiking boots and went up the trail that we normally went on. Well, it's one main trail and a couple other ones kind of branch off. And where some of the ones branch off, it's just kind of a short trail and a clearing for if you want to go camping or picnic or anything like that. We had got about halfway up the trail, and my shoe got untied. With me being a naturally clumsy person, I said, hey, guys, go on, I'll catch up to you. I need to tie my shoe real quick. So they walked ahead of me, and one of the trails to a clearing was right to my right side. I heard a noise as I was tying my shoe, but with all the wildlife around the area, I didn't really think anything of it. Finished tying my shoe, and I stood up, and out of the corner of my eye, and it actually made me turn my head that direction, I had seen this creature. I don't really know how to describe it. I've seen what, like maybe the typical size of a wolf in North Carolina was, but this was a lot bigger than that. I'm 5'4". It was hunched down with a deer carcass, and it had to be every bit as big as me hunched down. I guess I had made some kind of noise, and the person that was directly in front of me kind of turned around and doubled back towards me. She saw it through, like, the break in the tree branches and it kind of froze and gasped. I don't know if it hurt us or anything. Put down the deer carcass, kind of stood up on two legs, looked in our general direction, turned around, and took off for the tree line. I mean, I was probably 40 or 50 yards away from it, and I've never seen a creature that big. I couldn't really give an exact estimate of how tall it was, but I'd say at least 6.5 feet when it was on two legs. It had brownish black fur, and I could definitely see a muzzle. That's why I originally thought it was some kind of wolf. I'm not too much of a hunter, but I do know the wildlife. I don't know any wolf that would turn into a bipedal creature and take off into the woods.
When all this was going on, were there any smells or sounds that it seemingly made or emitted?
The only thing I really heard, and that was kind of when it noticed us, was probably, I would describe it as kind of like a grunt in a way, as far as like maybe a sound of recognition that there's people around. As far as the smell, I really couldn't describe it, but it's definitely the most rotten smell I've ever encountered in my entire life.
What kind of smell are we talking about here?
It's kind of like a mix between a decaying animal and maybe like rancid trash.
Yeah, that's pretty commonly reported. Rotting meat, rancid trash, the strong smell of urine, that's pretty commonly reported. You mentioned that one friend that turned around and saw the dog man. Roughly how close was she when she saw the dog man?
She was standing maybe 2 to 3 feet away from me. When I was on the trail, it was straight. So, around the same distance as me.
I thought you were alone when you saw that dog man. I didn't know that she had doubled back and was right there by you.
She wasn't close enough to get the view that I saw, but I think she got a good enough glimpse to kind of maybe put the fear of God in her.
Yeah, that's totally understandable there. As your group walked down that trail, it sounds like you walked right past it. Is that right?
From the way it was looking from the clearing, yeah, just kind of on the other side of trees.
It kind of makes you wonder how many times people walk through the woods right past things like that, and by not being attuned to their surroundings, never know how close they were to things like dogmen or Sasquatch or who knows what else. If you wouldn't have stopped to retie that shoe, sounds like you never would have known it was there either.
I honestly don't think I would have. I mean, it's definitely a scary feeling looking back on it now, thinking if I could have walked right past it and not have even known it.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. When we're out in the woods, most people, unless you're a really seasoned outdoors person, we're so out of our element, things like that could take us out at will if they wanted to. Moving on, because of how the dogman you saw reacted to your presence, do you think they might not be as dangerous as some would lead you to believe?
As far as the way the one acted, I definitely think that there still is dangerous, but I think maybe it was an act of self-preservation in a way. It knew there were people out there, and it just wanted the cover for the tree line.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's human nature when you see something like that you've never seen before that's not supposed to exist to just zero in on its face. I've got no doubts that you studied its face for as long as you could before it turned and ran for the tree line there. Was there any kind of facial expression that you noticed by chance?
The only thing I really remember vividly about it, it did have the muzzle. And I am supposing this, seeing as how it was in the act of doing it. With it eating the deer carcass, there was a lot of blood around the muzzle area. I don't really remember the eye color because at the time, it really shook me up.
Yeah, that's no surprise. Paul, the two of you live near a place called the Horicon Marsh. From what you told me about the place in the pre-interview, some interesting things have happened there and continue to happen there. In fact, you've had your own strange experiences there. Please tell us what you know about the place and all about your strange experiences there.
Well, Staricon Marsh is actually at 33,000 acres to be precise. I kind of looked it up. From the glacial period, there is a lot of heavy Native American influence in that area. Burial mounds, little encampments. But kind of all started doing my research and was like, there's bound to be something out here. So going out into the field, doing the field work, started concentrating on a few areas that I thought at the time were going to be good. The one night we went out there, there was two friends and me, and we took two different vehicles. We were going out down this long hunting road. We came back, and I was ahead of them and took off ahead. We all met up on this top overlook. My one buddy, he let out a call. The call that was returned about 15 seconds later was not a Sasquatch. The only way I could describe it would be like a demonic howl. Enough to get the hairs on the back of your neck standing up. And at that point, it was pretty much, we're going to call it a night.
I can't say I'll blame you. You know, that's one of the most frustrating things about what I do. You've got so many people that become interested in the dogman phenomenon and whatnot. It becomes evident pretty quickly that there are so many things about dogmen these people don't know, but yet they're willing to put themselves out there without being properly prepared for the potential dangers they might be faced with. I think if more than half of these people had a chance to hear a howl like that, which I have heard, I'd be astonished if they had any interest in going back out to look for these things. Yeah, their howls, they can make sounds that sound spot on the worst werewolf you'd ever imagine, way out in the middle of the woods.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, it's pretty creepy. Paul, you told me about the islands around the marsh that are really hard to get to. Do you think dogmen or Sasquatch in the area use those islands as sanctuaries?
I would like to assume they do, just because close to 3/4 of the marsh is federal now. You don't have free go around willy-nilly and, wherever you want. You can go out into the federal side, but there's only specific places, really. At night, I'll be honest, you need a boat to get through there. I would not want to be caught out there at night looking around an island by Department of Fish and Wildlife and whatever else could be out there. The marsh is not as deep as most people think. I mean, there are some deep spots, but just because there's water, trust me, it's not as deep as what people think. If need be, you're going to get pretty mucky, but you could walk out there in quite a few places.
Paul, you found a strange set of prints one day while you were in the marsh. Please tell us about them and how you stumbled upon them.
We were out hiking in Nitschke Mountains, which is kind of detached to the marsh in its own roundabout way. Out by the far trail by the spring-fed pond, it was close, it was fairly close by. And the ground is soft on that trail. And these prints, they were definitely canine, but they were bigger than any wolf print I've ever seen in my life. The ground was soft, and I was walking on the same ground, and I go a little over 200 pounds, and I was not sinking near as deep as these prints were.
About how large were those prints?
Well, I could put my hand inside of it, and the thing that really drove me was you can see the claw marks. Wisconsin's not devoid of cougars, or mountain lion, however you want to, whatever term you would like to use. But when a big cat walks, they retract their claws. Actually, just recently, Milwaukee had reports of them. There's actually footage.
Wow, that's a little too close for comfort. Paul, you think something or things live in the marsh most people would be unsettled with. What do you think it is, and why do you come to that conclusion?
Well, for one, some of those noises are not any natural wildlife we have, native to this state. And I highly doubt something escaped from the zoo that no one could really identify the sound to. But all in all, I'm going to stand by the Horicon Marsh. It's perfect habitat. You have water source, you have food, you have shelter. It's perfect. It's also desolate in places. There are places you won't see houses for quite some distance.
Yeah, it does sound like a perfect place to hole up if you're a dogman or a Sasquatch.
33,000 acres is a lot of distance.
That is a lot of land. And the two of you went to an overlook at the marsh one day. When you pulled onto one of the roads there, you heard something in the woods beside you. Please tell us about what happened.
All right. It was actually when I first moved up to Wisconsin. I had actually never heard of the Horicon Marsh before moving up here. We went during the day. On the federal side, there's this road called Dyke Road. There's a dam, and the road's kind of cut off, so you couldn't fully get across anymore. We went down that road in the daytime, went to a nearby town, ate supper, went back after dark. We turned on a road before you get to that one, and it was on the DNR side, the state side. We went all the way down the road to where this little overlook was, turned around, and started driving back up the road at that point. I was on the passenger side at the time. He was driving, and at the time it was in my truck, which is a little two-wheel drive Tacoma. It's not exactly the best to get away with on gravel. We had been joking around the entire day of, oh, this is perfect habitat. I bet there's a dogman out here. I bet there's a Sasquatch out here. I had made that joke again as we were going down the road at night. We got about halfway down. That was when I made that joke. My fiance had looked out his window and drove forward a little bit and said, you know what, maybe you're right. And started in reverse, backed up maybe 3 or 4 feet, and put it in park. At the time, there was some woods beside the road that they were trying to clear out. It's like they had taken the brush from trees and maybe like really tall grass or something that had been in the way of maybe trails or something, and were stacking it up in a way for the DNR to take off. But there was one in particular that we saw. It was, I could say that I could probably lay down in it and still have room. It was huge, and it was hollow. We'd actually seen it during the day. When we came back that night, kind of shined a light in that direction, and there was something in there, and it was huge. It actually moved a little bit. The minute I saw it move, I kind of turned into a big chicken, and I told him to gun it. He started to drive, pedal to the metal, and the truck just stayed there. My tires did not want to bite on this gravel. Finally, they kind of grabbed a hold, and we took off down the road. We actually went back out there about 2 weeks later, and it was still hollow. There was nothing in it this time, but this was also during the day. But I know how big some of the deer are up here. That was a lot bigger than a deer.
For a split second at least, you had second thoughts on whether researching things like cryptids was in your future and maybe a good idea after all.
Well, at the time, and that's like I've told him before until I got rid of my truck, it was a regular cab with a sliding back glass window with a bed. I told him, I said, for one, there's no telling what's out here. It could jump in the bed of the truck. It could reach through a window. I don't know. We both carry handguns. At the time, it didn't even dawn on me that I even had it on me. I was just more concerned of just getting out of there and trying to figure out what it was.
No matter whether you're carrying a gun or a camera, it always gets me when people talk about how an eyewitness was foolish not to whip out a camera and take a snapshot of a dogman that they saw. Why didn't they do that? Well, you place yourself in a situation like that and see if you have your wits and wherewithal to pull out a camera and try to take a snapshot when you're worried about even walking out of there in one piece in the first place. Paul, not long ago, your daughter called you to tell you about a screeching roar she had heard behind her home. Please tell us about what happened that night.
Well, at the time I was living out in the country, and I went into town to go to the gas station and get some stuff. I was on my way home, about a quarter mile from the house when she called. She was upset, is, I guess, one word we can use for it. She heard a noise. She was used to staying home by herself, and nothing ever really got to her. This one shook her up, as she said it was like a loud roar screech. And those are her words, that it shook the house. And I was like, no, it didn't shake the house, it shook you inside, not the house. But she's like, well, where are you? I'm like, I'm about a quarter mile from the house, and came up, clicked on the off-road light on my Jeep, pulling in. Field's right there by the driveway. Pointed it, couldn't see anything. So I walked in the house, and when she said the dog, she was a big black German Shepherd. The dog made one jump from the living room couch into the kitchen over by the heat outlet for the wood burner. All her hair was puffed out, snarling, everything, which she never really did. The corn was all the way up. It was late in the year. I ain't walking through a cornfield that night looking for something. That ain't happening. Never figured it out. But later on, I went on YouTube and started playing noises of recorded calls or sounds. It kind of sounded Bigfooty, but she said it wasn't like the Sierra sounds. This was, she goes, take that and cross it with a howl, like a timber wolf howl. And I was like, oh, okay. But after that, she slept upstairs, and she actually put blankets over her windows that night, from there on out.
Oh, I don't think anyone could blame her for doing that. You told me a few days before your daughter called you that night to tell you about that strange sound she had heard. You heard something that sounded like a bulldozer coming through the woods near her place. What happened that night?
Yeah, we were hiking on Nitschke Mountains. It was during daylight yet, and it was really, really disgustingly hot outside. No breeze or anything. We got about, between maybe about 3/8 away, realistically, up towards the spring-fed pond, and you could hear something coming through that forest, and it sounded like a bulldozer knocking stuff over. And at that point, she kind of got startled, and it was like, we took a couple more steps, and then it got louder, and was coming closer. I was like, okay. Had her back up slow and go back to my Jeep. And I was like, well, keys are in the ignition, you know, I'm coming, I'm just giving you time to get there. If you hear me screaming or anything, just jump in the Jeep and you drive down the trail to get me. I started backing up, and you could still hear noises. At a certain point, once I got close enough to the entrance part of it, I even turned tail and took off, jumped in the thing. There was none of this niceness backing up. It was reverse, dump clutch, and go.
You know, Paul, you impress me as one cool, calm, customary guy. I'd hate to see what it takes to get you shook up out there in the woods. I can't see it being a small matter to get you unwound like that.
I've hunted since I was a young teenager. And I've been hiking and camping. You know, I've been camping like up in the Nicolay. And I'll, you know, just backpacking and hike out into the forest. I grew up around forest and woods and stuff, and it never really fazed me. But it was pounded in my head at a young age, well, there's nothing out in the forest that can get you at night. Well, when you actually look back and realize what's out there, it kind of takes that whole phrase and, yeah, that means nothing.
Yeah, no doubt. I've got to give Ann credit, too, after seeing something as scary as what she saw that day. For you to go out into the woods, Ann, and do the kind of research you do, takes a lot of sand to do that. I'm really impressed.
Well, sometimes I just kind of have to block that part out of my head so I'm able to continue the research. My biggest thing is I want to know more about these creatures, because you can look up a Sasquatch. There's all kinds of stuff of them. all over the internet, all in books, but there's not really a whole lot about these that people know.
As time goes by, I think that is going to change. It seems like the whole Dogman phenomenon's catching on the way Sasquatch did about 20, 25 years ago. Hopefully it's not too long before there's a lot more info out there that's easily accessible on the topic, but time will tell. Paul, please tell us about the day your neighbor's son claimed something had chased him across a field.
That was actually an interesting night. I was actually just laying down, reading a book in bed, just relaxed, and cell phone rang, and neighbor's son was winded, out of breath, half, in my opinion, it sounded like he was half crying. Something big chased him from the tree line through the field halfway back to their house. And at the time, I was sitting there going, no, nothing did. It was your imagination. Well, he wouldn't give up and wouldn't give up. Finally, I was like, okay, tomorrow morning we'll go walk out there and I'm going to prove to you you're wrong. We get out there and, it happened to have rained that night, which didn't help. But we get out there trudging through a nice muddy field, which was so much fun. You could see prints. But with the heavy rain, any print in heavy rain and mud and dirt is going to enlarge, just how it is. But to this day, yeah, he won't tell me. It's like I can't get everything out of him. What I did get out of him was they were out coyote hunting, and whatever it was came from the tree line, chased them. He fired a couple shots. I cannot remember if he had his .22 out there or, it was a small caliber rifle. Fired a couple shots while he was running, and I think that was probably, I don't know, it was either a plus or a good thing or a bad thing. Why it slowed down or didn't go after him and his friend further. I don't know if it's just the crack of the gun going off deterred it, or it just angered it even more, and that's why it did pursue for where it did. But he won't say everything. It's like he's afraid to come say everything that actually happened step by step. But you could distinctively see tracks, and you could see their tracks, and you could tell there's, when someone's walking through a muddy field versus running, you could see where they were running too, and you could see, where they were slipping and sliding. So they were in a hurry.
Yeah, it sounds like it. From the info he did share with you, what's your take on what really was chasing him that night?
Well, he actually thought it was Bigfoot. Once we looked at the tracks, no, that wasn't it. They were a canine-type track, and you could tell it was, right away it was on two legs. I was like, no, in the first words at that point when I told him, he goes, it's a Bray Road beast. I go, well, we don't know. Until you see this, you can assume all you want, but were the odds with them? Probably. Would I gamble on it? I might. Those prints were too canine and way too big. They're very, very similar to the ones on Nitschke Mountains. Where we lived out that way, and Nitschke Mountains is maybe 3.5 miles. It's not that far away. Whatever's out can actually just go right through the farm fields. There's no city separating us.
Yeah, that's really close. Did he ever actually see what was chasing him that night?
He said it was big, black, on two legs. When he said big, I specifically asked how big. He's like, well, it's bigger than you. And I was like, okay. I'm not that big. I'm like 5'11". He's like, well, no, it was bigger than you. There's a tree way in back. It's this younger one, and then there's one, tree limb that juts out, and that's at about 6.5, 7 foot. And this thing, he said, came out from around behind the tree. He saw it, and its head was, in the middle of that tree limb for height. And I was like, okay, so it was big. And I was like, why did you shoot? Well, I was scared. Okay. Did you hit it? I don't think so. I wasn't paying attention. I was too busy running. I was like, okay. I mean, I actually took a night and went out there. I actually did go out there that coming Saturday with him one night. And he was very persistent about bringing a fairly sizable firearm. And I was like, well, you just want to be careful because maybe it's one of your buddies playing tricks and you don't want to just shoot at a shadow and find out you shot some kid. But we went out there anyways, and I made sure I wouldn't let him take any shots. But we're standing probably 40, 50 yards. You could hear something in a tree line. You see like a shadow bounce occasionally from tree to tree. And at that point it was like, okay, just back up, give it room, whatever it is. He's like, well, you want to shoot it? I'm like, no, I ain't shooting it. I can't, number one rule of hunting is you identify your target 100%. You don't shoot at shadows. I'm like, just let it be. We backed up, and that's where we left it.
I wonder if it ever sunk in with him that whatever it was that was chasing him that night could have caught him easily. It just let him go.
I told him specifically, because his friend was with him, and I'm like, whatever it was, if it wanted you to, it'd have had you in a blink of an eye. You can't outrun most wild animals in general, like a wolf or even a coyote. You can't outrun them either. And that's why predatory animals generally are fairly quick.
Yeah, they'd be pretty hungry if they weren't. I'm not sure if it makes it more comforting or more unnerving knowing that whatever it was toying with them that way. But that's how it was. And where you live now, there's a Lover's Lane kind of place. Something horrible happened there that shook up the community. Please tell us what you know about what happened.
The story that I heard was it was kind of a connecting road between two major roads. And there's a little spot down there where, you could park and fish and have a picnic, and a lot of the teenagers would drive down there and park and make out just to stay away from everybody else. The story that I heard about it was there was a couple that went down there. Nobody saw them for the rest of the night. They went there the next day trying to look for them, and the windows were busted out of the car, and they were pretty much just ripped to shreds. Instead of trying to look for what caused it, they just blamed it on, say, maybe it was just a hitchhiker that came through. We're never going to find them, so let's just close the case and block the road. That way nobody can get down on it anymore.
In a lot of cases like that, when you hear about something like that happening where it almost seems like it might be an urban legend, in that instance, I guess it was verified as being true, a true incident, wasn't it?
I've heard it from a couple different people. I can't remember the exact year that it happened, but, I mean, it's well, I wasn't born then, and I wasn't up here then, so I wouldn't know about that. From what I've heard, I don't think it was just some story to keep people out.
Makes you wonder what really happened that night. If it did happen at all, of course we don't know for sure, but it still makes you wonder. Paul, at Nitschke Mounds Park, there's an Indian chief's gravestone. There's a kind of lore about something unusual that chief did. What do you know about that?
Dodge County Historical Society Museum actually has a little bit of history on it, and I was there one day reading about it. The gravestone is in the cemetery, maybe a mile or so up the road from Nitschke Mounds. It's the largest gravestone in the cemetery. People around helped pitch in for it. It was an Indian chief that was there at that point in time. The rest of the tribe moved on. He stayed behind, which makes absolutely no sense. Because when a tribe moves, no Indian chief normally stays behind to watch over or guard whatever he was doing. Nitschke Mound, there's over a dozen mounds, Indian burial mounds, just on that property. Not counting the ones that are in the farm field that were plowed over years and years ago.
That's a lot of mounds. And do you think the park having so many burial mounds plays a role in the apparent cryptid activity there?
Well, from what I've read, I think it would go either one of two ways. I've heard that they would put these burial mounds in places dogmans were to keep people from disturbing the mounds. It's almost like a way of scaring them out. I've also heard that they're actually attracted to burial mounds and native land. So I'm not really sure maybe which one it is, but that particular place, it truly is the perfect habitat. There's not really a whole lot of people that go out there on a typical day, so it's pretty off the beaten path in a way.
Yeah, it does sound like kind of a strange place. And 2 days ago, you and Paul went to Nitschke. It wasn't exactly an uneventful outing. What happened?
When we went out there, we just decided to go kind of just to get out of the house. We got there Sunday morning about 10:30, maybe. Just decided to go out and walk around like we normally did. We walked over the path. We always go around by where the spring-fed pond is and kind of make our way around. When we were over there, there's kind of like a piece of land. It's almost like a peninsula in a way that kind of juts out. There were some ducks that were sitting over there. When we walked up, we weren't even fully at the pond yet. There was no way possible that they could have seen us or heard us. We were still too far away. We heard this, it's almost like a splashing sound, and the ducks took off. I think we both kind of had to think back on it. It was almost like something really big, kind of just maybe either dove into the water or kind of just sunk down into it to kind of hide.
How far was whatever this thing was when it hit the water? Did you get a beat on that, or would you just have to guess?
Honestly, if I had to guess, I would say maybe 8 to 10 feet away, but there's really thick trees right through there, so you can't really see all the way through. It was close enough to where I could see the ripples in the water coming off of it.
Did you ever have the ability to guess on the size of whatever it was?
It was definitely bigger than me.
If it was a dogman or a Bigfoot, you think it would have just slunk behind a tree or something like that to disappear instead of jumping into the water like that, but I guess you can't think for either one of them, so who knows? Paul, your gun dealer's son won't stay the night at Nitschke Mounds Park. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, for one, you're not really allowed to camp out there. But when it first opened, the gentleman is a Civil War reenactor, so they did their encampment thing with the tents and all that stuff. Well, to do it right, they always slept overnight, so nothing got messed with. No one in that encampment actually made it through the night. They all actually left in the middle of the night just because of some of the noises they were hearing. Those muzzle loaders they have, even the cannons, that's still real gunpowder. I mean, some muzzle loader dumps some pebbles or something down it. And these are grown men in there running.
It must have been a pretty creepy night to make them all pack up and head out like that.
I've never been there at dark. I'll be honest, I really don't want to.
I can't say I blame you.
The marsh area, where I do a lot of my research, I have no problem with. But there's just something about that place, I don't want to go out there after dark.
Yeah, from the things you've told me about the place, it sure does sound like something just isn't quite right about it.
Some people might just say it's, the whole haunted Indian burial ground thing, but I've never heard a ghost sound like a bulldozer.
Yeah, that's a good point. Something was making that noise. That reminds me, you found a place in the park where something large had bedded down. Please tell us about what you found that day.
Yeah, they just recently redid the trail, and I have to figure out another way to get back there again. But they used to be able to go in this back section. It was like a prairie type thing. And it was that really long, tall grass, comes up to your chest and stuff in the summer. And, you know, being a hunter, you've seen, like, how deer bed down and stuff, which you can usually tell. This was not like a true deer, you know, where deer have been bedding down. This looked substantially larger. I mean, never really dug into it too deep of looking for hair samples or anything, just because when you're back there on certain days, you get this feeling that something's watching you, and it's a very unnerving feeling when you're out in grass that tall, because you don't know where it could be. And it's one of those, yeah, we're just going to look quick and move. It's bad enough, believe it or not, I've actually dropped my cell phone out there and had to actually sit there and go looking around for it one day, which was not enthusing me. To the point where I was about ready to say, forget it, I lost it, and call the cell company and say, give me a new phone.
I can't say I blame you. That's not exactly my idea of fun either.
Like I said, I mean, we both carry, and I'll be honest, it's a last resort, and that's primarily all it is a last resort. Because a 9mm, you really aren't going to do too much besides tick something off.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? I think a lot of people, when they take guns into the field for self-protection against these things, they've got no clue what kind of trouble they can get themselves into really quickly if they're too quick on that trigger finger.
Do I think there's probably exceptions to the rule? Yeah, I do. How many people can afford a $12,000, $13,000, $15,000 50 caliber semi-automatic? Not many. And not to mention, you know, $5, $6 a round. That's not something you just go willy-nilly tromping through the woods with.
Yeah, that's not something that you just want to pack around in a situation like that. Even though, like you said, that's probably what it would take to effectively protect yourself against one of these things. Switching gears here, Ian, what's your ultimate goal for researching dogmen? Proving they exist to other people, or learning more yourself about them?
Right now, it's probably a little bit of both. I do want to know more about them, but at the same time, I'm not really sure if I want to have another encounter because I don't really think the next one's going to go as safely as the last one.
Yeah, if you do have another encounter, I've got to tell you that the odds are pointing towards the direction of it not being such a benign experience. Paul, where you used to live, you said a Black Hawk would fly over your house at night and circle fields in the area. What was that all about?
I have no idea. Besides annoying to me. I mean, it started off pretty harmless. I mean, I understand military pilots, they have to do their maneuvers. I fully understand that. But when it started happening every night, every other night, and then altitude would drop to the point of, at times, about 250 to 500 feet. That's a little lower than you should be. Granted, I was 1.5 miles from the airport. But you still should not be doing that over civilian area. And they would just kick on their big night fare light, or Blackhawks have FLIR thermal imaging, use one of the two. But they would sit there and go all around the field areas and just keep circling, go to the airport, and come back and keep doing that. I mean, it got down to the point where I had them, let's see, at least 2-3 times a night at one point. I mean, I was woken up at about 1:30, 2 in the morning by one coming over the house low enough to where it was shaking the house.
Yeah, I can't think of many people that would be okay with a situation like that either. It's ironic you mention that because I know of someone else who had a very similar experience with Blackhawks doing that kind of thing. They would circle behind his house with the spotlight on, down on the trees, into fields, open fields behind him or whatnot, It really makes you wonder what's behind all of that.
It did. I mean, at first I figured, okay, maybe someone's growing something illegal out there. Okay, not my problem. But you're not growing anything illegal in the middle of winter, because nothing in Wisconsin grows in the fields out here in the winter. And they would still do it, even in the winter.
That is strange. Yeah, you think if they were going to do something like that, they'd be a lot more covert about that. You wouldn't think they'd be waking people up at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. doing something like that.
It got down to the point for annoying. 'Cause we had to, end up having to go chase horses down and jump the fence because of it a few times. But it got down to the point where I actually had to call the reserve center where they were out of, and it was like, I'm not kidding you, they transferred me to 7 different people in a reserve center that's, the whole area is probably smaller than your average super Walmart. I'm like, you gotta pull up over this property, because there's horses out here. You just really need to pull up. It lasted for about 3 weeks and back to normal again. What their normal low flying heights.
Yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. All right, you two, it's about time for your closing comments, and please go first.
Well, the only thing I can really say is to anyone that's interested in looking for these things, and even anybody that's just out hiking, definitely be aware of your surroundings, because there could be stuff out there that you wouldn't even know about.
Well said. How about you, Paul?
Well, if you want to research something like this, be my guest. Be very, very careful, because sometimes you may not want to actually get that close to something you want to see that bad. I mean, this isn't a Hollywood story where it's been written and everything. We don't know what these do. We're talking about something very few people have seen.
There are a lot of people out there trying to do whatever they can to have an encounter with one of these things, but you know what they say, be careful what you wish for. You can't unsee something. You just might put yourself into a situation you can't get out of. I want to thank both of you for coming on tonight and sharing all the stories and info. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. And I don't know about my other half. I'm not going to give up on the research. I'm going to continue.
Well, I'm glad you're going to stick with it. And do you see there being a day sometime in the future where you get such a scare that you decide to drop your research, or do you plan to stick with it no matter what?
I'm hopefully planning to stick with it no matter what. If there ever comes the day that I get that really nasty encounter, it's definitely going to make me think twice and maybe even doubt it. But I think for the most part, I'm just going to continue, at least until I get the answers that I need.
Well, I admire your determination. Thanks again, both of you, for coming on. Like I said, I really do appreciate it. Well, have a great night.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. If you've had a Dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you. Episode 58. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, dogmen. Our guest tonight is Josh Turner. If you'll remember, Josh was our guest for episode 55 a few weeks back. Josh has quite a few more stories to tell about dogmen, so I wanted to get him back on here as soon as I could. Thanks so much for coming back, Josh. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Vic.
You know, after that last show we did, there were so many good reviews, I've just been looking for an excuse to bring you back on. Luckily, you mentioned after that show that you had friends and friends of friends who have had encounters with dogmen that you'd be happy to share on a follow-up show. Having said all that, before we get into the encounters, there are a couple of questions I wanted to throw at you. The first question is, unfortunately, you've had a dogman encounter as well as a grizzly bear encounter. We've heard what happened with the dogman you saw, but what happened with the grizzly?
Well, I wouldn't call it an encounter. I was in close proximity to someone who was hunting one. What ended up happening was I used to bodyguard for different people, some of them very wealthy and some of them actually considered celebrities. There's several here in Austin. But I actually had a friend of mine. He said, there's this guy, he's a well-known comedian, says he's got a friend from New York who wants to go hunt a grizzly. When he travels abroad, he wants to have a bodyguard. I'd recommended you. This guy's a bodyguard too, but he actually works as a helicopter pilot for somebody here, that lives off Lake Travis, so he couldn't do it. So the guy calls me up and says, how would you like to go to Alaska? I'd been there once before, but I told him, yeah, that sounds good. What are we going to do? And of course, he wanted to go hunting. I wasn't really keen on the idea of just going with somebody to kill an animal, but this particular bear had been a nuisance animal, and they wanted someone to get rid of it. So this guy was going out there to do it. He actually had a place out there in Alaska. It wasn't far. It was about 100 miles, which is nothing in Alaska. It's such a huge state. It was about 100 miles from where he stayed. It was getting closer to winter, and these things are starting to not hibernate. It's a weird phenomenon where they're actually starting to scavenge kills from like wolves and cougars and other animals. And it's happening like in Yellowstone and in Alaska. They're having these problems with these bears that are staying out all winter. Now, I don't know what that is, if it's global warming. I don't know what it is. But anyways, this bear had been causing problems for people in that area. We went out there to do this hunt, and we find it. We track it. There's an outfitter that knew where it was at. He was a guide. He found it, and the guy that I was with, he took a shot at it. The guy told him to wait, but he didn't because this guy's kind of a prick. He shot it, and he hit it, but he just wounded it. So this thing bear down on us, no pun intended, and it charged us. When it did, it got probably within about 40 or 50 yards of us, and I was already like way back. I took off the opposite direction. I figured, you know what, there was about 6 of us that just left that spot, and it was just the guy that was doing the hunt and the outfitter. So anyways, the outfitter ended up having to take the shot and kill the bear. Of course, this other guy took the credit for it. He was all over social media bragging about it and took pictures with it. This thing was probably about 9 feet long and about 1,500 to 1,600 pounds. I remember grabbing the claws and looking at it and looking at the teeth and just thinking what an awesome creature this was. It just reminded me of the Wolfman thing that I'd seen years ago. This happened in 2010, I believe. So, yeah, that was about 5 years ago. Not something I'd want to do now or ever do again because it was a terrifying experience, especially after what had happened to me with the werewolf or whatever it was.
Yeah, that's not something anyone would ever want to have happen to them. Not a good scene. Now that we've established the fact that you've encountered both, how would you say they compare?
I would say the grizzly bear was bigger and it looked more powerful, but I think that the wolf had the edge and speed. It definitely moved quicker. I think it was more terrifying just because it was such an aberration. It's just something you don't see. You know, you see bears all the time on TV and things like that. It's a different spectacle when you're up close to it. you can watch TV all day long, but when you see this thing in real life and it's coming at you, it's like, what the heck? I figured out why the guy needed a bodyguard, because he would go into bars and shoot his mouth off and start fights. And that's why he needed a bodyguard, and I never worked for the guy again. And I ended up pretty much disgusted with his behavior. But, yeah, that's that story.
I can't say I blame you for refusing to work with him again. Sounds like he was a total liability, unfortunately, but a common quip from Dogman skeptics is that eyewitnesses merely saw a timber wolf that was standing on its back legs. At a friend's house, you saw a timber wolf standing on its hind legs. Having seen that, do you think a timber wolf standing on its back legs could be confused with a Dogman?
Absolutely not. No. No, I have a friend that lives out in Bastrop, not far from here, 35, 40 miles, something like that, to the east of Austin. The timber wolves, he has 3 of them. And the people that tell you there are no wolves here in Texas, that's bull crap. I don't know where these people are getting their information from. I don't know why they say that. I've heard people say that. Like, I lived in Texas and there's no baloney, okay? I know there are. You go out to the Big Thicket in East Texas, there's a lot of them. You go out to Bastrop in that area, Rockdale, those areas, there's wolves out there. There's not a ton of them, but there's some out there. This guy had 3 of them, and he had bred them with dogs. The hybrids were huge. And I remember messing around with one of the full-blooded wolves, and then his son, which was a half-breed. It was half Malamute, half wolf. And playing with both of them, and they would kind of jump up on you, you know. You're talking like maybe 6 feet tall. But there's no way you can mistake that for what I saw in 1990. There's just absolutely no way. No comparison at all. I mean, people that say that, they're just off their rocker.
Yeah, whenever I've heard someone claim that that's what it was, just a case of mistaken identity, that it was a timber wolf that they mistook for a Dogman, I almost have to laugh because there's no way that you would ever do that. All right, Josh, let's jump right into the encounters now. Please tell us all about these encounters in any order you'd like.
Last time we talked, we had touched base again, and I had told you from the get-go that I had several stories, but I wanted to get the main ones out, like the one that happened to me. There were several stories that I had collected over the years, because after what had happened to me, anytime I talked to someone and they had a strange story or an encounter, once they had heard my story, they would speak up, or sometimes someone would just tell me the story. I lived in a house that had a lot of weird paranormal activity going on. Like I said before, I never saw a ghost. The only thing I could call it was like these shadows or whatever. But people that stayed with me had seen different things, probably more than I did. But definitely had some friends that had some encounters. I had a friend of mine, he owns a nightclub, actually 2 of them here in Austin. His name is Arash. Very popular guy, everybody knows him. He used to run a club downtown. I worked with him for years in a club, and now he's got a nightclub here in North Austin. It's pretty popular, it's doing well. But he gave me permission to tell his story and to use his name. He's actually half Persian. His encounter happened out in Lubbock because his dad used to work in the oil fields in Iran. When he came over here after the Ayatollah took over, he went to work in the oil fields, and it was out there outside of Lubbock. Anywhere from Lubbock down to Midland, that's all oil area. So anyways, they were living in Lubbock at that time before they came here. His mother was from here. He had been playing around their cemetery down the road from his house when he was a kid. He said he was about 11 years old. And it was for Halloween, which is odd because it was like me and him had never talked about this encounter, and then one day we ate dinner and it just came up. We were talking about stuff going on in my apartment. My brother was telling him. So he opened up to us about this story that he had. I had never told him my encounter, and he had never told me his, so we just started talking. He said, I had a weird incident happen to me near Halloween one time. When he told me that, I was like, whoa. And then I told him, I said that I had an incident that happened to me near Halloween, and it was so strange that we both had had this same thing happen. So anyways, he was playing around there at this cemetery. Him and a friend, they were building like a little fort in the woods right there by it. And he started hearing noises like footfall, like something was stalking him, something was coming out of the woods or whatever. And at first they thought it was like a person, like a man or something, but being little kids, they were like, whoa. So they got kind of creeped out, and it was about an hour and a half before dark, according to what my friend told me. He said, it's getting dark, let's get home. So they were freaked out. So they took off walking down this dirt road and to cut across the field that goes back to where they live. Because his friend lived down the street from him. He said that they kept thinking that something was paralleling them in the woods. They just thought it was a person or something, like a really big person, because it was making a lot of noise and it was scaring the hell out of them. So when they got about halfway, they just took off running across the field and they went back to their houses or whatever. When he got home that night, he kept feeling uneasy, like something was wrong. He goes up to his room and he's playing with his toys or whatever, messing with his costume for the next day or whatever. He hears this scratching on the glass. He looks up and he sees this silhouette, because he had this like pull down blinds or whatever, pull down I don't know what you call them. They're just like, it's like just like a pull down. I don't know what you would call it. I know exactly how he was describing it, but I can't tell you the name of it. But it was like one of those pull down blinds, whatever. They just pull down and they roll up. So anyways, he said he saw the silhouette of something that looked like a wolf's head. So he got freaked out, so he went to the other window, he looked, and he saw this thing on the side of his house, like literally a couple feet off the ground, looking in the window. So he closed the blinds on that window, went and screamed and told his mom and dad. His dad looked outside and saw this thing. At this point, had jumped down and was taking off into the direction of the neighbor's yard. Well, about an hour later, after everything calmed down, he went back to his room to go to sleep, and he started hearing the noise again. Then he saw the silhouette move. So he walked over to the window where he thought it was at. He's like, it's got to be this thing that I saw earlier, you know? And so he took up his courage, and he went over to the window, and he peeked out of it, and he saw it standing right there staring at him in the window. He said he just slipped, and then he let go of the blinds and backed up, and they rolled up. So this thing was just staring right at him, and it was licking the glass. Like it had its face pressed against the glass, and it was licking it with its tongue out. Like it was tasting it or something. He said he'll never forget. It had like these really ugly, like yellowy looking eyes. And he said that it had these really pointy ears that looked almost like a German Shepherd or, you know, whatever. This really pointy ears on top of its head. So he ran back out, and his dad got his gun, and he went back outside, and it disappeared. They don't know where it went. That was his encounter. That's the first encounter that I wanted to tell you about, because I just reaffirmed that with him this past couple of weeks. We talked about it. There's been a lot of different encounters in this area. The second one I was going to tell you about that we had talked about, we had a DJ that worked at our club years ago, back in 2005. I wasn't actually working at the club at that time. I was just always hanging out, going up there and whatever on the weekend. One night after the club closed, I was hanging out, joking around with the bouncers and the bartenders. I did that all the time on the weekend. There was this DJ that worked there. His name was Jacob, and he was from Argentina. His parents were from Buenos Aires. Him and his girlfriend moved out to Marfa. And Marfa is this small town, became like a mecca for these hipsters, these artsy type people. And they were all moving out there. So they rented a place out there, and he got a job out there DJing at a local night spot. And in the house that they lived in, the way he described it was like there was a gravel road, and there was only one way in, one way out. And there was another road in front of their house that just went a couple of houses over to the east, and then that was it. It dead ended. So the only way to get to their place was to go down this gravel road by the cemetery. It was close to Halloween. They had been out there for a couple months. They wanted to get something to eat. There was just one place that stayed open all night there, and that was it. So they went out there to get something to eat, and they got in the car, and they were driving down the road, down this gravel road. He said it was kind of bad in certain spots, so they couldn't go real fast. So they were driving down this road, and they were talking, and they see these two, what they thought were guys, horse-playing. That's the way he described it. They were horse-playing, kind of kicking and swinging at each other in a cemetery. And his girlfriend was like, what is that? Why are these guys out there in the cemetery? He said it was dark, and it was probably like 9 at night, you know, or something like that. They see these two guys kind of messing around with each other or whatever, like they were play fighting, the way he could describe it. And when they drove up and they got even with the cemetery and with these two guys, they realized these two guys were like hairy, and that they didn't look like normal people. But they definitely saw arms and legs, like humanoid arms and legs. He had this high-powered flashlight, and he said he shined it into the cemetery, and one of them put up its arm, and he saw this arm was like hairy, and he saw these claws, and they saw these weird-looking dog-like heads on these things. And then they realized, what is that? One of them put its hand up, or arm, to block the light, and then it just got aggravated and started loping toward them. It got down on all fours and kind of jumped toward them. So they just took off, spinning out in this gravel road. He said, man, like it broke my axle. You know, I went over these bumps and everything. He said that they got to the diner and they were sitting there talking about it. They were trying to rationalize, what was that? What did we just see? He was like, well, maybe it was guys in costume. His girlfriend was like, no way. There's no way those were costumes. I don't know what that was. So they were really freaked out. And he told me that they sat at that diner for like 3 hours because they were scared to go home. So eventually, you know, they said, well, we got to go home. So they did. They didn't see him again that night. Well, about a week later, and they were having a Halloween party at his place. They decided to throw a party and invite all these people because it was, I guess, during the week or something. So his girlfriend, Gina, had her friend Karen over. Karen was cutting some vegetables up for a party tray on this island they had in the kitchen. His girlfriend was in the kitchen looking out the window, I guess, in front of the window, I should say. She was cleaning something, cleaning a tray or something. And one of these things pops up at the window. It just literally came up from the ground up and just there in the window. And his girlfriend just screamed and backed up into the island, and Karen, the girl that was cutting the cucumbers or whatever, she cut her hand real bad. So Karen, she cut her hand, and she's like, if you don't take me to the hospital, I'm going to take myself. And they're like, no, don't go outside. Well, she didn't understand what was going on. And it was because they didn't tell them about these things they had seen in the cemetery. They didn't tell anybody. So Karen just thought they were being weird. Like, I just saw one of those things in the window. She's like, what things? What are you talking about? She didn't see it. It was gone from the window. So Jacob said that he told him, okay, I'll take you to the doctor. Just relax. So they got the keys. He said he was scared that it was going to be out there in the yard, but they went out into the yard, got into the car, and they took her to the doctor, the hospital, whatever. And he said, well, we have guests coming over. They're going to be here in a couple hours. I'm going to go back to the place. He said he was terrified to go back, but he didn't know what else to do. People were going to start showing up, you know. So he goes back to the house. He said he sat in his car for about 20 minutes debating about whether he should even get out because he was scared. So the way that he described where they lived, he said that there was just a gravel road that ended, and then there was just a park behind their house. There was no other houses on that west side of where they lived. So if this thing was on that side of the house, nobody was going to see it but him. So he decides to finally get out and goes inside the house. But once he's inside the house, he starts getting the stuff together and finishing the prepping and all that for their party. He hears a bang at the back door. Something banged against the back door. And he's like, what the hell was that? The back door faces the park. So he walks over there apprehensively. He had a pistol. He grabbed it and went to the door. He thought, well, maybe it's one of my friends. They're knocking on the back door. They're already here early. And he said it was just starting to get dark. So he looked at the people. He didn't see anything. And he thought, man, I hope it's not one of those things. So he goes back into the kitchen to finish doing whatever. Well, then he sounds like two knocks, like, you know, bang, two thuds. At that point, he thought, well, maybe it's guests arriving. Maybe there is somebody out there. So he walks back up to the door, looks at the people, doesn't see anything. The light's on out there. And then he says, well, at that point, I thought, well, it could be somebody. I opened the door, I looked out, didn't see anything. He goes back into the kitchen, and this was really weird. He hears something like moving against the door, kind of like sliding against it. And then the light went out. He could see it through the window in the den that the light outside in the back porch had gone out, which was weird. And then he heard a crash, like a thud against the door. At that point, he knew something was wrong. Something had kicked the door. So he goes out and he opens the door, and he has a gun and he has a flashlight, and he's looking around. He says that he didn't see anything at first, and then he spun back around 180 degrees, and he sees the flashlight. The first thing it hits was the foot of one of these things. He says he sees this paw-looking foot, and he lifts the flashlight up. He also said he saw genitalia. He lifted it right up to the chest and then to the face, and then right then, something reached out and smacked the flashlight out of his hand. He spun back around, and he saw these two shapes kind of like crisscross. So he ran back in the house and closed the door, and then one of them, like, I guess, kicked the door. The way he described it, like somebody would kick it, you know? And it kicked a hole in the lower part of the door. And he said at this point he was scared to death, so he called the police. And the police show up, and he tells them, well, you know, what are you going to tell them, that there's werewolves attacking your house? So he tells them that there's some people messing around out here. I think that they just vandalized my house or whatever. So at this point, the girlfriend shows back up with the girl that had cut her hand, and the girlfriend tells the police when they're just about to leave that what she had seen, she was talking to the police, she told them about the incident in the cemetery, and then she told them that one of these things had popped up the window. Well, there were two different cops. One was a Hispanic cop, and one was a Native American. It was a Yaqui Indian. And that's what the guy told him. And he said that this Indian cop told him, look, I've been out here for 13 years. He goes, and I know what you're talking about. We've had reports of these things before. He said, how long have you been living out here? And they told him, well, a couple months. And he said, well, if I were you, I would move. And there he did. After that, later on that night, kind of an addendum to it, you know, the guests started arriving, and the first guest that showed up was a friend of his at the club he DJ'd at, and he was wearing a really bad werewolf costume. And he was like, dude, it kind of freaked him out because what just happened. So I asked him, I said, well, maybe it was the guy in the costume? He goes, no way. He goes, this things I saw were nothing like anything I'd ever seen. It just looked like bigger versions of those things I saw in the cemetery, which means that there were multiple ones. And then he said later on at the end of the night, there were people in the backyard. He was kind of worried. He's like, man, I don't know if I should have people out here, you know, with these things running around. But he was embarrassed to tell people, you know, what am I going to say? I've known these people for a couple months. I'm going to tell them, yeah, there's werewolves out here. He just told them that maybe trick-or-treaters or somebody had vandalized his door. Now, that's how he explained it. The light bulb, this is really creepy. The light didn't get broken out. The bulb had been turned to where the light went out. That means that one of these things had the cognizance to turn the bulb to make it go out. That's creepy, man. He said that he just noticed that the light was out, so he messed with the bulb, and he realized it had been unscrewed. It didn't break it, I guess, so it just, like, turned it. And I thought that was really creepy. That was almost like, you know, letting them know that, look, we can do this. I don't know. That was just the way I gathered it. So he screwed it back in, and at the end of the night, they were cleaning up some of the beer cans in the backyard and stuff. The backyard wasn't fenced in. And he said that they heard this weird howling on the other end of the park. And like 2 or 3 of his friends were back there, and they were like, oh, what is that? He said he knew instantly what it was, but everybody was kind of freaked out by it. They were like, yeah, that gives me the chills. You know, they're like, that's weird. But that was his story. That story really gave me the creeps. To move on to the next one, there was another story that was given to me by a guy that used to work for us. I don't have permission to use his name. He owns a business there in Georgetown, right outside of Austin. So I'm going to call him Paul. There's an old church, an old German church that's been abandoned for a long time outside of Georgetown. If you look at it now, it just looks like it's falling apart. But he went out there when he was a kid. This guy's a little bit younger than me. They said back when he was like 12 or 13, him and his older sister, who was about 5 years older than him, I actually met her once, but I don't remember her name, and his sister's boyfriend. They went out to this old abandoned church to check it out because they were like, you know, it's rumored to be haunted. So they're like, let's go check it out. So he thought, you know, this would be fun. You know, it was toward the end of summer. So him and his sister went out there to go mess around in this church. At this church, it's like the windows, some of them were boarded up, and they'd been boarded up for so long that the boards were starting to fall down. They went inside. They just kind of pushed the door in. It wasn't even locked. It was just like it barely was like on the hinges, you know, so they just pushed the door in. They walked in, and they're messing around. He's like looking at all this stuff. He said one of the things that struck him was that everything was still in place. They had like the fuse. Everything looked like it had been untouched, and then everything had just been left there. His sister and her boyfriend went toward the back of the church. They found all these like crucifixes and things that were in the back, the crosses or whatever that had been untouched. She found one, and she said, I like this one. I'm going to take it. He said then he started having this really creepy feeling, like he really thought that something was there, something was wrong. So he told his sister, he says, I don't think we should be in here. We shouldn't be taking anything out of this place. We should leave. Anyways, she's like, oh, you're just being scared. There's no ghosts here or whatever. And he goes, I don't feel anything about ghosts. You know, he goes, I felt like something tangible was there. And he said that he was looking out the window, and he saw something move by the window, just like a shadow, like it moved really quick. And he was like, whoa, what was that? So he walked up to the window and got a good look, and he looked closely, and he saw, in the distance, he saw a well. And this thing, he saw like an arm coming up out of the well, then he saw like what he thought was like a dog, like the head of a dog. And it came up, and it kind of looked around, swiveled its head around, And he thought, and the first reaction he had was that it was a man pushing a dog up out of the well. But the arm-looking thing that he saw, he said it looked like claws. Then he saw another arm come out of it, and it was one complete body. And then it pushed itself up out of the well, and he realized that it was like this dog-headed looking creature. He had seen something go by the window, so he knew there was probably another one. That was probably what it was he saw the first time that got him to go to the window in the first place. So he's screaming at his sister. He's like, we gotta go. There's something out here. He looks back out the window, and he doesn't see the thing anymore. So it had disappeared, and he was like, oh, shoot, this thing is out of the well now. He says, there's something that just crawled out of the well, and they're like, oh, Paul, you're just being, scaredy cat, whatever. There's nothing out there. Then he looks, and he sees another one coming out of the well, and he says, come here and look yourself. So finally they go over there to the window, and they're like, what? And they see this thing loping away from the well. He's like, there's at least 2 or 3 of them out here. I saw them. She's like, oh, my God. So they freak out. At this point, they decide that they're going to leave. So then they start to walk away, but then they see one looking in the window further down from where they're at, and they stop. And it was pulling down one of the top boards to look in. There was only like one good window that wasn't full of dust that they could clearly make something out. So they looked out the window, and their sister said she saw like a tail, like a wolf's tail, like a dog sitting on its hind legs, and its tail would be sticking out. It was looking in the window, so they got freaked out, and then they saw this shape coming from the other side by one of the windows. So then they all jumped down. The sister's boyfriend was already walking in between the pews. He saw it looking in at the window at him, so he jumped down underneath one of the pews and sat there. At this point, they were all just petrified. This is broad daylight in the afternoon. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know where to go or whatever. They just sat there. There was nothing they could do. And they're like, we can't make it to the car. These things are out there. He said about 20 minutes went by, and then they hear clawed feet walking into the front of this church. They just heard like this kind of barky, yelping noise, and like they were talking back and forth with this barking noise, whatever. They were like, oh my God. So the sister's boyfriend was about 3 pews in of the church, and so he said he saw the feet of this thing. He said it looked like a mixture between a human and dog feet, and that he saw the claws, and the sister and my friend that worked for me, whatever, him and his sister were huddled together underneath one of the windows. The sister's boyfriend said that he clearly saw one of them walk over to the window and look down, like he was trying to look in where they were at. At that point, my friend said that he heard it like rubbing against the window and sniffing. The one that was in the front of the church, it walked back out, like quickly ran back out of the church and went back outside. And then they heard like noise like on his car, like something was messing with his car. So they just sat there. He said they sat there probably 3-4 hours. They just sat there crying, stunned. Him and his sister were crying. So finally, sister's boyfriend, he gets up the balls to crawl out from under the pew, and he looks and he sees his car, but he doesn't see them anywhere. He says, look, we got to make a run for it in the car. It's getting dark. That was the worst thing. They were just like, we're out here in the dark, and there's no one that knows we're out here. So they get back out to the car. They just make a run for it. They get out to the car. The car door, the passenger car of the car door was open. So these things had opened the car door, and they had, and this was the part I told you about was crazy. They smelled urine. These things had urinated in the car and on the car. One of the seats had like a tear in it. Not a bad tear. It just looked like maybe one of them had positioned himself in the car, you know. And they saw like a weird-looking paw print, like it was wet or something, like it had left like a weird print on the dash. So they get in the car, and they smell this awful urine, wet dog smell in the car. They pull out, and they drive out. They don't see these things anymore. The only thing he could think of was that when the thing walked into the church, he felt like the thing could not go into the church. Like, that's why I turned around and ran back out. It was like the church was a sanctuary or something. And he said his sister was holding this cross, and she carried it outside with her. And to this day, he said that she keeps it in her house, and it hangs on the wall. She thinks that their prayers saved them. That's the only thing he could think of. He's like, I was praying, please don't let me die, God. I don't want to die like this. Please deliver me from this evil. You know, he said he was praying. And I remember when he worked for me, he was a very devout Christian. He wanted Sundays off to go to church and things like that, and he told me that was why. He felt like God saved him that day, and he owed it to God to be a Christian. So, anyway, The end of the story, they're driving down the road, and apparently something had happened to one of their tires. Maybe one of them had cut it or something. Tire just comes off and it goes flat, whatever. So they had to pull off the side of the road as it's getting dark and get out and put a tire on the car. And while they're doing this, they hear this howling noise coming from down by where the church was. And they were only about 4 miles away from it, he said at that point. He said that he was helping his sister's boyfriend change the tire, and he said he had tears in his eyes, and his sister's boyfriend kept telling him, be strong, be strong. He said to this day he thinks that if it wasn't for that guy being brave, he's like, I don't know if me and my sister would have ever moved from that spot. But that's a pretty creepy story. I don't know what I would do if that happened to me. Because, what happened to me was bad enough, but that, being out in the middle of nowhere, man, I'll tell you what, dude. That story, that was one of my good ones that I had. There was a couple others. I have a cousin. I'm not going to say his name, but he owns some land out near Copeland. He has some cattle out there, and he has some tanks that he stocks with different types of fish, like bass and catfish, whatever. He lets his friends and family go out there and fish. They use the tanks for the cows that have water to drink. I guess this was about 6 years ago, I guess now. He told me this story. It was right around Thanksgiving, and he was telling me this story about some guys who wanted to go turkey hunting out near his land. He told them that it wasn't a good idea. They thought he was being kind of a prick, and he's like, what, you think we're going to shoot one of your cows? He's like, no, I'm not worried about that. I mean, I just don't think it's a good idea. He was telling another cousin of mine that he didn't think that he should go out there either. He's like, just like I told this other guy. My cousin, who didn't tell me why, I didn't know anything about it. He just said, why? Because of those Bigfoots or whatever you got out there? My cousin told the other one, he said, well, wouldn't call them Bigfoots. I don't know what they are. They're just some kind of something out there, and I don't think it's a good idea. I said, what are you talking about? I'd heard lots of stories over the years around my hometown. He goes, I don't know. I had some friends that went out there, had a weird incident, and I let them go fishing out of the tank out there. They claimed to have seen these creatures, these things, attack some of my cows. It really freaked them out. To that, I just thought, well, it's probably not a good idea to let people go out there and go hunting with whatever that is roaming around out there. And I was like, well, do you believe that it's out there, whatever it is? And he goes, yeah, I do, because periodically one of my cows will turn up just torn to pieces and eaten. He said it's not bad enough to where, I don't feel the need to go stake it out. It just happens once in a blue moon. He said that for a while there, the predation was kind of bad. And he said that he finally had just decided, you know what, I'm not going to live in fear, because for a long time he didn't want to go out there. He always wanted his brother to go out there with him and stuff. He said he just kind of put it in the back of his mind and dealt with it. But the story that he told me was that he had let a couple of his friends go out there and go fishing, which was a regular occurrence. He had a guy once tell him that he saw something really hairy and big going out into the bushes like it was stalking him, and it creeped him out, so he left. He didn't think nothing of it. Well, this was probably about a year after that incident. He said that he had a couple friends who went out there, and one of them, I know him very well, him and his other friend who grew up with my cousin, because my cousin was a little bit older than me, they went out there to go fishing. About dark, because they were still fishing after dark, because sometimes the fish bite at night, just certain types of fish. And so they're out there after dark fishing, and they hear the cows mooing, that noise that they make. I've been around cows my whole life, man, and they react weird. So they started to stampede, and they started to, run into the water, which is weird. They don't just run into the water and start swimming across the tank. And some of them were going around the sides of the tank, and it was just this huge mass of cattle, probably about 50 of them, and they're just running into the water. His friend, his first instinct was that something was spooking them, that maybe it was a predator. They heard one cow in the throes of death or something, like it was making a noise, like it was being attacked. So one guy, he was like, well, I'm going to go check it out. There's always that one guy in the horror movies that's like, I'll go investigate. He's that guy. So he decides he's going to go around the side of the tank and go look. The other guy, I know him pretty well. His name is Victor. He's got your name. But he's a smart one. And he was just like, with this, I'm not going to go looking around over there. You go ahead. So he goes, I'm going back to the truck. I'm going to go get the truck. These cows are running by him and everything. And this guy's like, I'm going to go check it out. He goes around the other side of the tank. He sees this hairy-looking thing. The way he described it was just like a dog man, exactly. The pointy ears, the muzzle, everything. And it was on the back of one of these cows, and then it was kind of like pulling it down to the ground. And then there was another one behind it pulling on its back leg, and they took this cow down, and they just started tearing it up. He witnessed this. And then he freaked out, and he just took off running back with the cows, like running in between them, trying to get back to the truck. He said that at this point, one of them, the third one, I guess, came out from around the other side of the tree line and was walking. He didn't say it was running. He said it was like walking really quickly toward his location, like coming from the opposite direction. He said he looked and he saw it kind of moving in between the cows, just staring at him, making a beeline for him. But there was all these cows in front of it. He said he just kind of blended in with the cows and just took off running to the fence line. And then his buddy comes out with the truck and pulls in, and he tells him, get in the truck. And at that point, his friend saw the top of the head of that one that was coming in between the cattle. He jumped in the truck, and he said they backed up, and they drove out. And they left the gate open, which was a big mess, because then the cows all poured out into the road and stuff, and my friend was infuriated. They called him, and they said, hey, I'm sorry, but we left the gate open. The cows are getting out. He goes, well, you got to go close it. What are you doing? They felt bad about that, but they were like, well, we're not going back up there. Something weird just happened. We saw these things attacking your cows. He's like, if you're going to come out here and check, I wouldn't come without a gun. He told them, he's like, if you're my friends, why don't you go wait by the road and wait till I get there? So they went all the way down this long dirt road, about 2 miles, and waited until he got to that crossroads. The one guy was nice enough to go back with him. The other guy was like, I'm not going. So he just sat there in the truck and waited there about 2 miles up the road. So him and his brother, my cousins, both of them, and then this other guy, Victor, they all went back. And they went into the pasture, and they saw the cows out in the road, and they rounded them all up. He said this took probably an hour. They closed the fence up, and then they walked out there to the pasture. They heard this loud howling noise that echoed between the tree lines, and he said it scared the hell out of them. At that point, he's like, I don't really care what the hell happens at this point. That scared me. He goes, I didn't give a damn, because I got back in my truck, and we left. And then the next day I went out there, and there were 3 head of cattle dead. Been tore apart. It was 2 cows and a calf that had been just ripped apart. He figured he was going to have to stake it out or whatever. He didn't know what he was going to do, so he was going to hire this guy to just go out there and stake it out. This guy that's a friend of ours lives close to Elgin. There's another small town outside of Austin. And I know this guy, too. I was raised around this dude. He's a backwoods hunter. He's always hunting, always posting on Facebook. When he told him where it was at, this guy told him, I'm not going to do that, because he'd heard stories about stuff out there, and he was like, I'm not going to go to that pasture and wait out in a tree. You're crazy. So, yeah, he couldn't get anybody to go do it, and he didn't want to do it himself. But that's another crazy story, and he said that the bite marks on the cows, I mean, they had been chewed up. They looked like oversized coyotes. He's like, he'd seen coyotes attack cattle before, but nothing like that. And as far as we know, there's no wolves in that area. I don't know what to make of that. You hear these stories over the years, all these different stories about stuff. And I've been hearing these stories since I was a kid, but I never paid attention. I never gave a crap. I never thought any of it was real until what happened to me. Then my ears opened up and my mind opened up, and then I was like, wow, this stuff is happening all around us. We don't ever register it or think about it, because until it happens to you, you don't really feel like you're faced to deal with it or anything.
Yeah, once you experience something like that, it's totally different. Having a night like they had, that's the type of night that'll make you sleep with the lights on.
Yeah. And, these people were like me. We were raised in the country. The difference was that after 15 years, I stayed out of the country. They still lived in the country. And to this day, I don't think they've ever seen one of these things. But they do believe they exist. They know that they're out there. Of course, the other members in the family will poo-poo that and say, that's bull crap. But on my dad's mom's side, they have a place out there, and it's called Joppa. And Joppa's out near Bertram, and Bertram's out near Burnett, and Burnett's probably the biggest town out there, which is still just a spot on the road. These are little bitty towns, and Joppa's nothing but a church and a little store. But in that land out there in the hill country, it's called the high hill country. It gets really cold out there in the wintertime. I mean, really cold. And it's really rocky. There's no farmland in that area. It's just like cedar trees and just a lot of rocks. But there's a lot of deer out there, a lot of turkey, tons of wild hogs. There's a nuisance problem we have here in Texas with these hogs. So in that area there, when I was a kid, I used to like to go out there and I'd hunt for arrowheads and spearheads and flint. pretty cool stuff. I remember when we would go out there around Thanksgiving when I was a kid, my dad's brothers would be telling stories of these Bigfoot-like creatures. I always thought they were just making it up. They called them looky-loos. And then they said there was this other creature out there. They called it a doghead. They didn't know what it was. That's just what they called it. The old-timers called it that. And I don't think any of my dad's brothers had ever actually seen one of these things, but they had just heard the stories. Hunters would go out there, and they would say they had an encounter with these things. Well, I had a buddy of mine. His name's Rock. He's from my hometown originally, but I actually met him years ago at the club. He was born in my hometown, but he didn't go to school there. We kind of hit it off because his brother actually went to school with him, and I was friends with him, and his half-brother. Rock told me, I want to go hunting. You know a good place? Well, I know several. So I told him, I said, well, you know, you can go out to my dad's family's ancestral home out there, a place called Joppa. He'd never heard of it, but I said it's out there near Bertram. Well, he knew where Bertram was at. He wanted to hunt deer and hogs. So I told him, I said, well, when deer season comes along, give me a call. Well, it did. He called me up. So I got a hold of my cousins from Giddings and another town. They got in touch. So he took them out there, him and some other people, and he dropped them off at the different stands. He told them, if you need anything, I'll be down the road. There's a reason for that, because he knows what's out there. He did warn them. He said, there's stuff out here, you got to be careful. He didn't come out and say, hey, there's Bigfoot or there's a werewolf out here, but there's this stuff, you know, that's not always what you think it is. So my friend was out in his stand. It was around Thanksgiving, around that time of year, and it was cold. He said that it was broad daylight. It was 11 a.m. I know where the stand is at. I've actually been there when I was young. It's an old rickety old barn. He said that he felt a thud up against the barn, and it shook his stand. He was like, what the heck is that? And then he felt it again. And he thought, well, maybe it's a buck, or maybe it was a wild hog. He looks out the stand. He doesn't see anything. All it is this one opening in the front. But he said he crawled out the stand, he crawled out the front, and he said he went around the side of the barn, and he said when he got about halfway to the side of the barn, he froze, and he saw this thing. He said it looked like it had the body of like a gorilla almost, but it had a big old snout on it like a dog. He said it was rubbing its back against the edge of the barn, like it was scratching its back on it. And he said just then he leveled his gun at it. The thing didn't notice him right away, but then he said he heard a thud, and he looks over and he sees one of them literally jump out of a tree. Like it had fallen out of the tree, and it was just standing there, and it just started walking toward him quickly, and then he thought, oh my God. And he said this one looked a little different than the other one. He said that first one looked almost like it was black, just like really dark black hair. He said this one looked almost like a brownish with a little bit of gray on its face, like maybe it was older or something. And he said it was quite a bit smaller than the first one. And he said that he started backing up, and he thought, oh my God, what are these things? He was telling me, I swear on the Bible, man, he goes, it was the creepiest things that ever happened to me. He said, and I started backing up, and he said just then, because there's like a gravel road, just a small road that kind of goes up to that stand, and then it kind of loops around and goes around to the other stands. And he said that he stepped onto the gravel, and he said he heard footsteps on the gravel. He turns around, there was another one. This one was just walking up the road, just hunched over, walking up the road toward him. The first one was coming toward him really aggressively with his mouth in a snarl, and they all three just kind of pushed him back like he was being pushed away. They kept slowly going toward him. They all just kind of got together and had him kind of surrounded, but he was still able to go backwards, and he just kept thinking, oh my God, I hope there's not another one behind me. He would level his gun at one of them, and they would stop. They were all just kind of like, you know, had their teeth bared, but one of them in particular was a little more aggressive, and they just kept going toward him and kept going toward him, and he kept backing up, backing up. Finally, he got close enough to the road. He just kind of trotted back out into the road. At this point, he was like, dude, I got on the road, and I started walking down the road to go down to the truck where your cousin was at. He goes, and I didn't know what was going to happen. He's like, I didn't know if these things were going to follow me or what. He said he looked back, and they just stayed there. They were just standing there in broad daylight out in the open, just standing there. And it's a very desolate road out there that goes out there to my great-uncle's place. He was deceased at that time, but they still used it for hunting and things like that. He goes, they didn't follow me as far as I know. He's like, and as I got further down the road, I heard this howl from one of them. You know, he goes, it shook the trees. I swear, it was so scary. He goes, the first thing I did when I got to the truck was just take a piss because I was about to pee myself from the fear. He's like, my testicles were just up in my stomach. That's how terrified. It was just so terrifying. He goes, I've never seen anything like that in my life. I've never seen anything that big out there, out in the woods, you know, in Texas. And he's like, I don't ever want to see it again. And he was just, you know, he was almost crying when he was telling me the story. And he goes, I know you don't believe me. And I told him, I said, no, Rock. I said, I do believe you. I said, I've seen something in town in Taylor. That story really, really got me. When he got back to the truck, my cousin was asleep. He said that he told my cousin what had happened, and he's like, well, let's go take a look. And he goes, I don't want to go take a look. I already did, and I don't want to go back out there. And he goes, well, we got to go get the other guys. So they went out there, and they drove through there. They didn't see anything. And he said that he rolled his window up and was like, look, dude, one of these things is going to come out and attack the truck. He said he was terrified of driving back through there. But he didn't want to be left alone, on the edge of the woods. So they went back up in there, and they picked up the other hunters, and the other hunters were like, well, what's going on? What's the problem? And, of course, he told them, this is what happened. Yeah, that was just pretty crazy. There's a lot of these encounters these people have in this corridor between Georgetown all the way down to, like, San Marcos and New Braunfels. I told you a story once, I don't know if you remember, about these black dogs that had jumped out in front of a friend of mine when he was playing Little League. This was a story that happened, I don't want to say in town in Taylor, but it was on the edge of town in Taylor, out of town in Taylor, whatever. And this guy, he actually works for a computer company, and he's a supervisor, so I don't want to give his name or whatever, but him and another guy that I grew up with were at a field called Hidalgo Park. They're practicing in Little League Baseball. That was one of the places where the different teams would go to practice. So anyways, they were leaving practice because they both live in the south side of town, and this is, like I said, on the edge of town. Now there's like a facility right there, kind of where it happened. It's called Teton Hutto, and it's like a prison facility. But it wasn't there back then. I think it's actually like an immigration layover or something like that for immigrants, but it's kind of like a jail. But anyways, they were walking along, and they were just talking to these two kids, and this other kid who's actually now deceased, he actually died when he was an adult in a swimming accident. So there were three people. They were walking along. One of them had a bike, but he was walking it, and the other two were just walking, and they were heading back to their house. And they heard in the weeds, in the bushes, some people speaking Spanish. They immediately thought, well, it's probably illegal immigrants. They were riding the railroad. They would sometimes do that. The train tracks intersecting right there in that area. So on one side, it's just this open field, and when it's not cotton season, it's just plowed over. When it is cotton season, it's just cotton growing out there. There's all these Johnson grass, all these weeds on the sides of that road. It's so high that you can barely see over it. It's kind of where they were at, and they couldn't see into these weeds. And just then, these three black dogs just came walking out into the road right in front of them. And he said that literally they looked like they were just humongous, oversized black dogs. That's the only way you could describe it. Like they were German Shepherd-looking dogs, but they were black, very shaggy. The one closest to them looked toward the other two, turned, and he said it literally smiled. Now, I don't know how a dog smiles. I can only imagine how this looked. But he said it looked like it made an evil grin, like it literally grinned. And then it stood up on its hind legs and just walked slowly across the road. And the other two just kind of loped behind it and went into the weeds, and then they crossed over into this barren cotton field, and they could just see them walking off. When he was telling me this story, he broke down. He was starting to cry. It happened when he was 12 years old. So it was traumatic for him. It scared the hell out of him. He didn't know what it was. What is that? But anyways, that story, he told me that when I was probably like 17 or 18, because he knew about the thing that happened to me. And I remember thinking back, we were in high school, and I told that story to a few people what happened to me. He wasn't one of the people that made fun of me. He was always pretty quiet about that. It didn't sound like he wanted to hear it. A couple years down the road, or 3 years down the road, he told me why, and he told me what had happened to him. So I collected that story. It's one of the ones that I had over the years that I had filed away, and I'm going to keep track of that. I never knew that there was anybody who collected these stories like you, who had a show, or anybody who wrote books, or anything. There was nothing like that. The only thing you could find in the library, and I was a bookworm, was just legends about werewolves, and myths about werewolves, and things like that. And that was always pretty interesting to me because I knew all about the different cultures and the different beliefs, but I could never put it together as saying, hey, this is where I saw, this is where it fits in. You know what I mean? That's the thing that got me. Nothing I read until the last few years when there's been this mass explosion of technology and people are able to communicate like we do now on the internet. And people from different states can connect instantaneously without making a long-distance phone call. It's kind of shrunk the world. The world is smaller now, so we're able to communicate better and learn more from one another in these experiences. But I got some more stories here if you want me to go on.
Please do.
Another story I want to tell, now this is kind of jumping around here, but this is all sort of in the same area. These are all from Texas. I don't have anything out of the state. I don't know anything about any of the other states. I just know what happened around here. These are all local things that happen. Out near New Braunfels, really, really, really pretty area. If you ever come down there, it's a beautiful place. It's Canyon Lake. I spent some time running around down there. I used to date a girl that liked to go hiking and do stuff like that. I would go with her near Canyon Lake. And it never bothered me to go out there for some reason. Most of the places out in the woods or country I really didn't like. But for some reason, I always felt kind of at ease in that area. I guess because I had never heard of anything being out there. Then one day, I had a guy that worked for me at the club years ago. His name was Bobby. We were talking about what had happened to me. These other guys were kind of laughing about it, and this dude was like, hey, it's not funny, man. You know, I had something like that happen to me, and it was terrifying. I asked him about it. I didn't say anything about it that night because I just wanted to let it go because everybody was laughing and making a joke. Well, I asked him about it one night. I said, hey, you ever get a chance, tell me about what happened to you. He said, well, I can tell you what happened out near Canyon Lake. We were working together, and at the end of the night, me and him get together, and his girlfriend showed up, and she was with him when this happened. And it only happened about a year before he told me this. And when he told me this was back in 2003, I believe. He told me this story, that they were out near Canyon Lake, and they were in a little canoe. They were paddling. And there's this one area where it kind of thins out. It's like a little offshoot of the lake. They decided to go check it out. And in that area, it was kind of narrow, so there weren't any, like, motorboats. There wasn't any picnickers or people out there. There was always a lot of people out there. There wasn't nothing. And they were out there on this little canoe. In certain areas of the lake, at that lake in particular, I believe, you can't take a boat, but you can get on canoes or whatever. A lot of people in this area do that. Not something I like, but people do. But he goes out there, and they're in this little paddle boat. They see this hairy-looking thing on the shore. It looked like it was down drinking water, and then it just kind of jumped down into the water. And it started paddling, but it was far away. He said it was like 60 yards. So at that point, he goes, I could just see the dog-looking head on it. It looked like a wolf or something swimming in the water, but he goes, he would see his arm come up, and it was swimming like a man. It wasn't dog paddling. It wasn't like the limbs run to the water. Him and his girlfriend were getting closer, and they're like, what is that? He said it got across from one shore to the other really quick. He said it was a good 150 yards across probably. It was a pretty good span. He said that in that one area where it was at, it kind of opened back up. He said it was across really quick. And he said as they got closer, they got kind of terrified. What is this thing? You know, because it doesn't look right. And it was really big. And when it got out of the water, like it started to walk on the shore, he said it was on two legs. And when it got on the other side of the shore, he said as they got closer to it, his girlfriend let out a yell, and he looked at her. You know, he goes, you could have got us killed. You know, like he was pretty aggravated. And she's like, I'm sorry. That led to a big old fight on the way home. He said they had a big old fight about it because he said that she was reacting ridiculously because it didn't see them until she made this noise. She let out this yell, which led this creature to look over at them, you know, and see them. When it did, then it like started kind of wading back into the water, and they were like, oh my God, this thing's going to swim back out to us. They're like paddling for their lives trying to get away from it. So then it just wades back out into the water and starts like swimming toward them.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so they're like paddling, and they started yelling like, help, because they didn't know what else to do, you know? And he said that they yelled, and there was this echo. And then he said that they heard this like howling noise coming from the woods, and this thing stopped. They looked back, and it like started quickly paddling back toward the shore. It heard something call it. So it went back to the shore, just left them alone, and it got back out. And he said that they just saw it like, the way he described it, it was like it had an ugly scowl on its face, like it was aggravating. You know? Like it was mad that they had seen it. It was kind of a warning, don't come back out this way, stay out of here type warning. So, yeah, that was a pretty crazy story.
Did they ever say how close it was at its closest to them?
I didn't get a proximity, like exactly how close it was. I just know that he said that it got too close for comfort, and he was just pissed off at his girlfriend for yelling like that. The next story I want to tell you about, and this guy gave me permission to use his name. His name's Philip. I used to lift weights with him all the time. He was like me. He was kind of a gym rat. We were always in there lifting weights. he liked to go hunting, but he was a purist. He liked to bow hunt. And we had this friend named Corey that worked at this club called Shakespeare's downtown. He was a good friend of mine. He asked me a couple times if I wanted to go hunting out in this place called Devil's Backbone. At this point, I had never been there. I had never dealt with it. He was telling me some stories about it on the way out there. I actually agreed finally after he bugged me enough. This was when me and Corey had gone out there the first time, and it was only one of 2 times I actually went hunting since my encounter. I went out there with him, and he was telling me that there were some scary stories out there. There had been some scary stuff. We were talking about ghost stories and stuff like that. He told me that the Devil's Backbone is notoriously haunted. I don't know why he was trying to scare me, I guess. I don't know. I guess he thought that I was a city boy, and I told him, I said, look. I guess he thought I was some city person. I said, nah, man, I was raised in the country, bro. You're not going to intimidate me. And I was just going along, you know. But I didn't tell him about my encounter. I didn't tell him that I was intimidated by something out there, but I didn't tell him what it was. But it wasn't ghosts. And he said, yeah, man, there's ghosts out there. There's supposed to be these Native American people. They see them out there, these ghosts, these Indians. And that there's actually a episode, Unsolved Mysteries, that has a show all about the Devil's Backbone. And it's right outside of Austin, about 30 miles from here. So if anybody ever wants to check that out, it's a pretty good episode. It's pretty cool. It's an older episode, but it does touch on some of the stories of the Backbone. But anyways, he's telling me about all this stuff, and so I go out there, and nothing happened. It was no real incident or anything that happened. I thought I heard some footsteps when I was back at the truck waiting for him, but it was nothing that I can attribute to like a dog man or anything like that. So anyways, my friend Philip asked me one day, we're at the gym, he's like, I want to go hunt hogs. And I told him, I said, well, you know, talk to Corey. He knew Corey. We all worked out together, and we all worked on the same street. He said, go out there. And I said, talk to Corey. This was back in like 99, 2000, something like that. He said, okay, but I'm a bow hunter. I need to be up in a tree stand. And I said, okay. So he went, he talked to my friend, and my friend said, well, I'll see what I can do. I know some people out there, because Corey went to school at Southwest Texas, which is now Texas State, in San Marcos. And this area out there was called Little Arkansas. That's just what they called it. And now it belongs to the state. I think the state bought the land. We used to go hunting in that little valley right there all the time. So it was a pretty popular area. He took him out there. He knew this guy named Lance, who's this old cowboy. I knew him too. One of the times my girlfriend had pretty much forced me to go camping with her, I went and I talked to this guy. He let us go out there and camp on his land. I did camp close to the road. And my girlfriend was like, this isn't camping. Well, it was to me because that's as close as nature I wanted to get. So, anyways, they go out there and they go hunting. Philip tells me that he was about 8 feet high up off the ground. Because when you're hunting hogs, you want to be up high. Because those things, if they get you on the ground, they can kill you. The hogs down here, I'm telling you, they're huge and they're really, really bad. And what they are is they're hybrids. They're domesticated hogs that had gotten loose from farmers, and they bred with these, what we used to call javelinas or razorbacks. There used to be a lot of those wild razorbacks and javelinas. Now they're all interbred with these wild hogs to create this subspecies that just gets gigantic. I mean, they're just humongous. And they're kind of hairy, and they're ugly, and they're just disgusting. They maul people all the time. Hunters get killed out there. So he went out there with his bow. He said he didn't see nothing, man. It was like an area where it's supposed to be full of hogs, but he didn't see nothing. He didn't hear nothing. It was like the woods was just dead quiet, which is creepy. He said it was like there was nothing. I mean, he goes, there was nothing at all, no noise. He said I was well camouflaged. I was up in this tree. And I thought I'm up high enough to where nothing's going to see me. So he didn't think it was the animals reacting to him, but he knew there was something there. So it kind of unnerved him. He said that at one point he thought he saw this shadowy-looking thing come out of the bushes and then go back into the bushes, and he almost thought it was a man. And he said his first thought was like, what is that? Is that a Bigfoot? Because we've heard stories of Bigfoots out there for years. He thought it was one of those. And he thought, wow, I may actually see one of these things. He said about 20 minutes later, he don't know what happened. He just started to kind of fall asleep. And he said that he woke up with a start like, oh, shoot, I'm falling asleep out here. He hears something walking around the bottom of his tree stand. He said he was trying to look down and he couldn't see what it was. He's like, I couldn't see it. I just saw like something hairy. And he said, but it was blackish brown hair. And he said that it came out from around one side of the tree. And then he said he saw it. He got a good look at it. He said he saw it. It looked like a wolf walking on 2 legs, but with a man's chest. But he said it was kind of scrawny. The way he described it wasn't real big. He said it was just kind of scrawny looking. He said that it went around the other side of the tree, and he was like, oh, shoot, what is this thing going to do? And then he says he heard it digging into the bark of the tree, and it sounded like it was moving up the tree quickly, climbing the tree. He was like, oh, man. So then he's taking his bow, and he's trying to level it around the other side, and he's going, this thing is going to come around the side of this tree and just attack me. So he didn't know what to do, and he had this whistle that he used when he would hunt hogs. Sometimes he would carry his dogs with him, and so he had a whistle. He took it out of his pocket, and he started blowing it. He didn't know if it would work or what because it was a dog collar, you know, and he blew it real hard right there by where he heard the thing on his right side coming around the side of the tree. And he said that just then, the noise stopped. He blew it again and again, and this thing, he heard it fly down from the tree. It got down on the ground. He said that it walked out into the clearing, and it looked up at him. It knew at that point he was right there. He said he looked up at him, and he had its bow leveled at it. He was aiming it right at it. This is where the story gets kind of weird. Now, this is what he told me, okay? He said that the thing kind of threw its arms up in a gesture of, like, what's up? Like somebody goes, literally, if you're downtown and you see a friend, you throw your hands up like, hey, what's up, bro? You know? He said that's what it did. And he's like, I swear to you, Wolf, I'm not making this up, man. He looked me right in my eye, and he said, I swear to you, man. And this was the beginning of the night before the clubs were open and we were all getting downtown. He told me this story. And he told me, he said, I swear to you, man, I ain't had a drop of drink. I'm telling you right now, this is my hand on the Bible. This is what happened. It threw its hands up. And then he said, I had my bow leveled at it, and then I saw this intelligence in its eyes, and I saw that it just looked like it was smart, you know, it was like, it was acknowledging me, and then he said it made like a yipping noise. So then he lowered his bow. He said that he didn't know what to do, so he spoke to it. And I'm like, you spoke to it. What did you say? At this point, I thought maybe this guy's bullshitting me, but he was very adamant. Then he tells me, he goes, I just said, hey, what's up? What is your name? Como te llamas? I didn't know if I could speak Spanish or what I should say to it. You know, it's like, and then it made kind of a barking noise, and he said it started just loping off into the woods. And he said that just then he saw this bigger one, like a shadowy looking, so he could see the silhouette, the outline of it, come out of the tree line. And he saw another one kind of walk in behind it, and they all three just went back into the woods. He said that he maybe called the other two up with that whistle. But it did something. It got its attention, and it made it acknowledge, you know, hey. But he didn't know what to make of it. He said he sat there in that stand until late at night. He was scared to get down. And he said he didn't know if the thing just couldn't get to him, and it got aggravated, and it just gave up, or if it was because the whistle made some kind of signal to it or something, you know, and maybe it communicated with him. But he said he felt like he communicated with it, and then it decided to leave him alone. He realized that there were two bigger ones right there close by. When he used that whistle, he thinks that it called them up. They saw that the other one was okay, so they all just kind of left the area. And he said that about 2 or 3 in the morning, he said he was still out there. It was late at night. And some hogs came out and were kind of rooting around, and he saw them kind of in the distance. And he said there was no way I was going to try and bag one. He goes, because then I would have had to come back out and get it later. He's like, I didn't want nothing to do with it. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. Sure enough, after he didn't show back up at the truck, a couple hours go by, and he was supposed to be back. My friend came out there to get him. He got back in the truck, and he told my friend what he'd seen. And my friend was like, man, he must have been smoking something. You know, he didn't believe the story, but Philip was very adamant about it. I had told him my story, and one day we were working out, and this was a couple years later, like maybe 2002 or something. And he's like, you don't believe me, do you? And I said, dude, I totally believe you. But he thought that when I told him my story that I was making something up, just like Rocky did. Like they thought, oh, he's just telling us a story to make us feel better. You know, I'm like, no, dude. I said, this really happened to me, man. Just like it happened to you, it happened to me. I told him there's a lot of people these things have happened to, but, you know, the thing is, Vic, most people don't want to talk about it. They're apprehensive to talk about this stuff, especially amongst hunters and these country people. They're going to be like, oh, you're smoking something, boy. And that's how they're going to react to this kind of information. And people like their comfort level, too. They don't want to believe that something's out there. They want to be able to tromp around the woods and think they know everything about their environment in the wilderness. And they don't like being taken out of that comfort zone.
That's true. Well, Josh, I think we're going to call it quits for tonight's show at this point. I want to have you come back and do a part 2 next week. Thanks again so much.
Thank you for the time.
Oh, anytime. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too, Vic.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.